Monopsony. What's monopsony? Nate, Meyer, what's monopsony?
It is opposite of monopoly, so when there is a small town with one really big employer and they buy all the labor.
Okay, so a monopsony producer is a producer that is the only user of a particular input. In this case, we focus on the input of labor, right? So monopsony labor is where we have one firm hiring all of a particular type of worker. I mean, a quintessential example is the mining town in the Appalachians, where if you work in that town, you work for the mine. The security force is owned by the mine, the post office is run by the mine, the store is the mine, the housing is the mine is the mine, etc. Right? So there's one employer. Yeah.
So would it be fair to say there's monopsonies of like resources, or is it only a labor?
No.
Oh, okay.
Any input.
Okay.
Any input. So I was reading an article recently. I'm trying to remember where it was. I think it was in Forbes. It was talking about how we are increasingly having a monopsony or oligopoly, which is not very many, right? But effectively some level of monopsony of the users of copper, because because as we are dealing with electric cars and batteries and such, I mean it's using a tremendous amount, and certainly lithium electric vehicles and such. So yeah, a monopsony producer is a producer that is the one of few or only consumer of a particular input to production.
Okay.
Is a labor union that doesn't employ anyone, by the way, right? They just represent employees. But let's say the auto workers union in Michigan, are they a monopsony firm or a monopsony employer? How so? They don't employ. I mean, they employ organizers and such. They don't employ auto workers.
Because without being in it, you're not going to make it.
Yeah. They control the wage, they control the quantities, they may as well be. They're a de facto representative not only of the worker, but once they sign that agreement, of the firms as well. Yeah, exactly. We have a monopsony employer of aspirin. No, we don't anymore, do we? Yeah, we do, because Falcon, et cetera, has not put human beings out there yet. So we have a monopsony employer of astronauts in this country. It's NASA, right? That will be an oligopoly, sort of, when Falcon, SpaceX, et cetera, starts putting people up. But right now, if you're an astronaut, you're probably working for NASA. Okay.
And monopsony is different than monopoly because they're the consumer, they're the producers compared to
Exactly.
like an employer.
A monopsony is a consumer of an input. A monopoly is one producer of an item, and because it's being produced, it's an output. Okay, the thing about monopsony is you'll have equations, of course, you know them. They are equations that help us with MRP of L, ME of L, and LS, and they create an image that probably looks something like this. And we know that monopsony producers are profit maximizing producers, subject to the condition of marginal revenue product of labor being equal to marginal expense of labor. Everything we said about how you quantify these in the first half of the course remains constant here. Marginal product of labor is change in quantity of output divided by change in labor. Marginal revenue product of labor is marginal product of labor times the price of the output good. Marginal expense of labor is change in total cost of labor divided by the change in labor. Labor supply is whatever the relationship we gave it. And total cost of labor is wage times labor units. If you have a table of values or equations, you ought to be able to motivate this kind of graphic. And in this case, this firm is going to hire the number of workers that it needs to meet the profit maximizing condition right here. So some L monopoly. Their MRP of L is going to be here, but they're going to pay the worker here. So there's some marginal profit that the firm keeps, right? And that these numbers are different is part of what tells us that while this may be generally a competitive market, it's not, or while this may be a general condition for profit maximization, it's not a competitive market. Because in a competitive market, you have MRP of L equaling the wage, which equals the marginal expense of labor. Notice the lack of a labor demand curve here. Does a monopsony, a pure monopsony, the only employer of a type of labor, do they worry about a labor demand relationship? Labor demand is whatever they say it is, because they are the demander. Okay, so you don't even have one. But if it were a competitive market, the labor demand curve would be right along the same curve as the marginal revenue product labor curve. Remember how one of those equations morphs to the other when we remember the competitive condition of MRP of L being equal to W, and substitute W for MRP of L in the relationship. So, Nate Wilcox, if I'm getting paid 11 and MRP of L is 17, and I know that productivity in this part of Appalachian, which I live, and in Norfolk, Virginia, which is not that far away, for my type of work is the same productivity. So if that's a competitive market in Norfolk, I should be able to earn 17. But here, since I'm in the hollow, I'm earning 11. What's my solution as a worker? How do I improve my condition?
If the costs of migration were low enough, you could move out to where you would get 17.
Okay, so I could move to Norfolk, leave the hollow, okay? And as long as it cost me 6 or less, I'm either in as good a condition or a better condition, right? This is not separable from the human capital investment decision, because maybe it costs me 5, and I'm going someplace, so now I'm giving up 11, it costs me 5, so that's 16, but I go to get 17. My investment in my migration, which maybe just was putting stuff in the back of my Pinto, right? And renting an apartment in some other city. But the difference between the 16, the wage I gave up and my cost of mobility, gives me a net benefit of 1, so 17 minus 16, and then depending upon my discount rate, I can calculate whether or not that was a good decision. Mobility is the solution to monopsony. And mobility costs something, and so I may have to consider it with respect to the HC investment equation.